Now, we all love high performance computers. As PC gamers, we tend to move towards the faster end and the newest and the shiniest and the brand spanking newest hardware we can possibly afford at the end of the day in order to play games in the highest quality, the highest frames per second, the highest resolutions, so we can be victorious and finally dominate all the noobs in all the video games that we play. But there are also other ways of increasing your performance of your computer, not just buying the latest and fanciest graphics card, and that is the form of overclocking. So today we're going to be doing a slightly different video. We're going to be having a discussion based video where we essentially find out what people's thoughts and opinions are around the topic and bring you a discussion based around it, and just how many people agree or disagree by use of things such as surveys and other analytics, just to find out what the general consensus in the PC market is. So let's jump into today's video and debate and discuss computer overclocking. Hey, what's going on guys? My name is Matthew from MLC Tech, and now overclocking is generally seen as something enthusiasts will get up to overclock their CPU with liquid nitrogen in order to, finally beat J2 or Kingping on, Port Royale benchmarks and try and get, sub-zero temperatures to really, crank out and get that ultimate performance. And other people might think that get out the liquid nitrogen just so we can play Doom Eternal at 100 FPS, which, okay, that game's very well optimized, so you don't need to really overclock to even achieve that now. But maybe to get over 1000 FPS, now that would be something. So that's, the extreme enthusiast end of overclocking. But it's also mostly seen as something specific to processors and graphics cards. So we see a lot of people overclock their CPU and graphics cards. But you can also do RAM overclocking if you so wish. So essentially you can, if your hardware allows you to, if you're not like anti-consumer practices such as Intel, which restricts overclocking on lower end CPUs and motherboards. Overclocking in general for the general consumer is relatively simple, as long as you know the risks and what to do if something goes wrong, because most of the time you can recover, minor overclocks and just general overclocks without causing any damage to your systems. We've even seen manufacturers, easily bring out utilities, software features and motherboard features so you can easily overclock your processor. Many motherboards, like for example ASUS Gigabyte MSI, they have automatic overclocking genies built into their motherboard BIOSes and UEFIs. So honestly, to get some more performance, it can be as simple as going into your BIOS and clicking a button. And yes, you can do the manual overclocking, which in my personal opinion is more fun to do and usual. You can get squeeze a bit more performance out of it opposed to doing all the automated features, because we've seen, especially when 10th generation series first launched, ASUS motherboards were particularly known to essentially increase the voltage quite a lot, and it was getting to the point where it was producing a bit too much heat. ASUS did later fix it in a firmware update, so good on ASUS for that. But the downside of overclocking your PC components is that you can in some cases void your warranty. And with Intel recently discontinuing their performance tuning protection plan for overclocking customers, it's become a little bit more risky as of late. But the idea of today's video is to hear from the general consumer and just see what the average Joe in the PC market is actually doing with the hardware. We want to know whether consumers overclock their hardware, however, be it big leaps in performance or small leaps in performance, and just what people are mainly overclocking out in the market. For instance, upping your GPU clock can improve frame rates in games, whilst overclocking your CPU and RAM can improve general system stability and performance, or more typical workspace applications. There's a lot of reasons why someone may want to overclock their system besides just gaming. And we've even seen marketing in the overclocking department from graphics cards and stuff where they claim it's already overclocked out of the box, which doesn't really matter so much in the space of GPUs at the moment, especially with how recent iterations of GPU and even CPU boost technologies are working at the moment. So a lot of times saying something's already overclocked out of the box is usually a lot of marketing garble, but it's still nice to see that, yes, okay, I've potentially got a couple of megahertz higher than I would have got if I bought the slightly cheaper variant of this graphics card or CPU. So let's take it over to the consumer. So let's go over some surveys that we've got to go into based on overclocking hardware. So the first survey we're going to look at is the simple question: do you overclock any hardware? Now, given that our sample pool's not quite as large, though in this survey we've seen 198 people vote yes that they do overclock their hardware and 72 for no, so quite a big margin of people who overclock their hardware in general. But let's break down what components people mainly overclock. So let's break down this survey. So CPU, GPU and RAM. Now, GPU is the most popular option here with 192 votes, with the CPU trailing not too far behind at 179 votes. But it's curious to see that, yes, GPU and RAM are pretty on level with each other, and RAM not so much, coming in at 95 votes, which is quite a lot less than compared to the GPU and CPU. So looking at this, I'm not surprised at all. The most performance is to be gained with CPU and GPU overclocks and not so much with RAM when it comes to gaming. So it's very clear that yes, CPU and GPU is really where you're going to be squeezing the most performance out of. So let's take a look at the next survey based on CPU overclocking alone, and that is how much are people overclocking their CPUs by these days. So two options: 0 to 500 megahertz, 500 megahertz to a gigahertz, and going over the limits with overclocking their CPUs by over a gigahertz. Now, the majority of consumers voted between 0 to 500 megahertz, just a casual bump in their overclock. So that's with 120 votes for 0 to 500 megahertz. 500 megahertz to a gigahertz came in at just 41 votes, so quite a lot less, and very few people overclocking their CPUs above a gigahertz, coming in at just 15 votes. And let's now go over to GPU overclocking and break down how far people are cranking up their GPUs. So first result, 0 to 50 megahertz on GPU overclock, 20 people, it's very small. 50 to 100 megahertz, also very small, 23 people voted for that. Though between 100 to 200 megahertz is where we got the most votes, coming in at 108 votes, and 200 megahertz plus 25 votes. So between 100 to 200 megahertz overclock seems to be what the majority of consumers are doing. Yes, I know a lot of people can be worried about really boosting their GPU performance quite a bit, especially because the GPU can get quite hot under intense gaming loads, so it's understandable why people don't want to push them too far, but also still get a nice 100 to another 200 megahertz out of their core clocks. It's still, you know, on average, a very safe thing to do, a very easy thing to do, and yeah, that's where the majority of gamers are going when it comes to GPU overclocking. So let's discuss, where do I fall in on this debate on GPU overclocking, CPU overclocking, RAM overclocking? What do I personally do? Well, when it comes to RAM, I don't really overclock my RAM at all. Yes, I've slapped on the basic XMP profile to get it at its rated speeds, but apart from that, I've not played around with my RAM clocks at all. Though GPU and CPU is another story, yes, I overclock both my CPU and GPU. I've been able to crank my 10900K up to 5.3 gigahertz, and my NVIDIA 3090 I've been able to get running stable at just above 2000 megahertz, which is, you know, 2000 megahertz on a 3090, quite a significant overclock. I don't quite mind a little bit of the heat rise because yes, okay, it's pulling more power, it's drawing more power out of the graphics card because it's running at a higher voltage, a higher core clock, but I'm not too fussed about it because I still get decent acoustic performance, while yes, it's still operating high 70s, low 80s, which is quite toasty but perfectly safe on a decent acoustic profile. So yeah, it's definitely worth it in my opinion. It's free performance on the table, and to anyone who's confident enough and have the power headroom or the cooling headroom in order to do it without sacrificing performance and, you know, having your graphics card going like a jet wind turbine. Yes, I think overclocking is a brilliant thing. It's free extra performance. Who doesn't like stuff for free at the end of the day? Yes, I can understand people have reservations on overclocking hardware because, people can be nervous about, potentially breaking their computer hardware or voiding their warranty. So I understand the reservations behind it. But in my personal opinion, for gaming and other applications, a little bit of free performance, I'm not going to turn down. So definitely overclocking's worth it for me. So anyway guys, what are your thoughts and opinions on this topic? Feel free to join in on the debate, join in the discussion, add your thoughts and let me know, what do you do? Do you overclock your components? What components do you overclock and by how much? And what are your thoughts and opinions on overclocking in general? Do you think it's slowly becoming a dying breed with the likes of more AI based and more algorithm based GPU tuning and overclocking that way? Or are you someone who likes to get your hands on and really play around with the different settings and really fine tune and customize your profile with your own computer hardware? Let me know in the comments down below. Join in on the discussion down below. Let's feel free to have a conversation. Let me know what your thoughts and opinions are. Anyway guys, I've been Matthew from MLC Tech. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. Let me know what you think of this new sort of format of video I'm trying to do. And give it a like if you found it entertaining or enjoyed it anyway. I've been Matthew from MLC Tech and I'll see you in the next episode soon. Goodbye.